The world sleeps, but Rome remains awake. For 1,000 years, it has stood as a beacon, a constant in a sea of change. While empires rose and fell on distant shores, while forests grew and receded, while rivers carved new paths to the sea, Rome was simply Rome. The 7 hills watched over the endless procession of days and nights, the sun rising and setting on its marble columns and sprawling forums. It was the center of the known world, the eternal city, a place where history was not just remembered, but lived and breathed in the very stones of its streets. Generations were born and passed away, their lives measured by the shadow of the Colosseum. The city was a living entity, its heartbeat the tramp of legionary sandals, its voice the roar of the chariot races, its thoughts the debates of senators. It felt as though it would stand forever, a silent, sleepless guardian of civilization. The world could turn, seasons could shift, but Rome would endure. It was a promise etched in travertine and gold, a certainty as reliable as the stars in the night sky. The city had seen everything, weathered everything. It had outlasted kings and tyrants, plagues and fires. What could possibly trouble the sleep of a city that believed itself immortal? What shadow could dare to fall upon the city of light? For so long, it felt as if nothing could. The world moved on, but Rome simply was. But even the most vigilant watchman must eventually blink. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the world began to move on without Rome. The threads that held the vast tapestry of empire together began to fray. A message that once took days to arrive now took weeks, or never arrived at all. A legion stationed on a far-flung frontier, once a symbol of Roman might, now felt like a distant memory, a forgotten outpost. The world, once held so firmly in Rome's grasp, began to slip through its fingers. Control was not lost in a single, cataclysmic moment, but in 1,000 small defeats, 1,000 unanswered letters, 1,000 miles of road left unrepaired. The borders, once sharp and defined lines on a map, became porous, blurred. From the dense forests of Germania, the wind-swept steppes of the east, and the sun-scorched sands of Africa, new peoples, new names, new ambitions began to press inward. They were not just barbarians at the gates, they were a new reality, a new world taking shape on the empire's weary doorstep. Within the city walls, the old certainties began to crumble. The steady hand of the emperor felt less sure, the pronouncements of the Senate less resonant. The vibrant pulse of the city, once so strong and confident, began to feel erratic, frail. It was the feeling of waking from a long dream to find your own home unfamiliar. The furniture rearranged, strange voices echoing in the halls. Rome, the master of its own destiny for a millennium, was losing its grip, becoming a passenger in a story it no longer wrote. The great, sleepless city was beginning to feel tired. Then came the night the unthinkable happened. Torches, not held by proud praetorians, but by foreign hands, flooded the streets. Their flickering light cast long, monstrous shadows that danced on the walls of temples and villas. These were not the controlled, orderly lights of a Roman festival, but the wild, hungry flames of invasion. The air, usually thick with the scent of spices and baking bread, was now choked with smoke and the metallic temps of fear. Shouts echoed through the avenues, not the boisterous calls of merchants, but the cries of alarm and the guttural commands of a strange tongue. For the first time in 800 years, an enemy army walked the sacred streets of Rome. The gates, once symbols of imperial power and security, had been thrown open. The heart of the world was being plundered. Gold, silver, sacred relics, the accumulated wealth of centuries was hauled away in rough carts. Statues that had witnessed the reigns of 100 emperors were toppled, their marble faces staring blankly at the chaos. It wasn't just a sacking of treasures. It was a violation, a deep and profound desecration of something believed to be inviolable. The city was a wounded beast, its pride bleeding out onto the cobblestones. The torchlight revealed scenes of terrible clarity. A senator's home, once a bastion of order and learning, now a chaotic jumble of overturned furniture and scattered scrolls. The eternal city was being broken, piece by piece, under a sky black with smoke. In the aftermath, a heavy silence fell. The smoke cleared, but the shadows remained. They lingered in the alleyways, in the hollowed-out shells of burned buildings, and in the eyes of the survivors. The city was still there. The 7 hills still stood, but it was a different Rome. It was a city haunted by the memory of its own violation. The echoes of the invaders' shouts seemed to hang in the air long after they had gone. Walking through the forum, you could almost see the ghosts of what had been lost. A missing statue left an empty pedestal like a fresh wound. A blackened scorch mark on a temple wall told a story more powerful than any inscription. The memories of glory, once a source of immense pride, now felt bittersweet, a painful reminder of how far the city had fallen. People spoke in hushed tones, their conversations tinged with a melancholy that clung to the city like the morning fog over the Tiber. They would point to a grand villa, now looted and empty, and remember the lavish parties that once filled its halls. They would look at the Senate House and recall the powerful orators who had shaped the destiny of the world, their voices now just faint whispers in history. The past was no longer a solid foundation. It was a dream from which the city had been violently awakened. The vibrant tapestry of Roman life was now filled with holes, its bright colors faded to muted shades of gray. The memory of what had been was a constant, aching presence. And with the fading memories came a wounded pride. This was the most profound injury of all, a wound to the very soul of Rome. The people who had once called themselves the rulers of the world now felt like subjects in their own city. The belief in Roman invincibility, in its divine destiny, was shattered. How could the children of Mars and the heirs of Augustus have allowed this to happen? The question hung unanswered in the quiet piazzas and the desolate temples. The pride that had built aqueducts across continents and law codes that defined civilization was now replaced by a quiet shame, a sense of deep, collective failure. Old men who had served in the legions would look at their grandchildren and wonder what kind of Rome they were leaving behind. The swagger was gone from their walk, the fire from their speeches. In its place was a weary resignation, an acceptance of a diminished reality. They were no longer the center of the universe, but an old city with a glorious past and an uncertain future. The world, which had once revolved around them, was now turning on a new axis, and they were left to watch from the periphery. The statues of the emperors, even those that remained, seemed to look down with a new sadness there. Marble eyes, reflecting not a city of infinite power, but one of ghosts and shadows, a city learning to live with the quiet sorrow of its own twilight. The eternal city was learning a new kind of eternity, not one of power, but of memory. The torchlight of the invaders had passed, but a softer, more permanent shadow had fallen. It was the shadow of what was lost, the shadow of a world that had moved on. Rome was no longer awake while the world slept. It was now a city of dreams, of whispered histories and faded grandeur. The great roar of the Colosseum was replaced by the sigh of the wind through its empty arches. The clamor of the Forum gave way to the quiet footsteps of those who came to remember. The city that once commanded the world now simply endured, its stones holding the stories of triumph and of loss. It became a monument to itself, a living museum of a faded glory. And in that gentle, melancholy silence, a new kind of strength was found, not the strength of legions and emperors, but the resilience of a story that refused to be forgotten. The fall was not an end, but a transformation. The light of Rome had not been extinguished. It had simply changed, becoming softer, more reflective, a beacon for a different kind of age. It was the quiet glow of an ember, no longer a raging fire, but still warm, still alive, casting long shadows into the future. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more journeys into the past. The Roman Empire, a name that echoes through millennia, a symbol of power, conquest, and monumental architecture. We often think of its dramatic fall, the clash of armies, the burning of cities, the end of an era. But what happened the day after? What happened to the millions of ordinary people left behind in the shadow of crumbling grandeur? This is their story. A story not of emperors or generals, but of survival, resilience, and the quiet, stubborn continuity of life. Imagine waking up not to the sound of marching legions, but to the gentle bleating of sheep. Your home isn't a grand villa, but a humble dwelling built right into the side of a massive, ancient aqueduct. The stones that once carried water to a bustling Roman city now shelter your family from the wind and rain. This isn't a scene from a fantasy novel. For generations, this was reality. Across the vast lands once called the Empire, life had to go on. The grand forums, once centers of political debate and commerce, fell silent. But soon, new sounds filled the air. The clatter of a blacksmith's hammer, the chatter of a local market, the laughter of children playing hide-and-seek among the fallen columns of a forgotten temple. The empire was gone, but the people remained. These weren't people lamenting a lost golden age. They were pragmatic. An abandoned amphitheater, its seats once filled with roaring crowds, became a natural fortress, a ready-made quarry for building new homes, or even a sheltered space for corralling livestock. The mighty walls that once defended a city from barbarians now protected a much smaller community huddled within a fraction of the old space. Life simply folded itself into the ruins, adapting and repurposing the past to serve the needs of the present. Take a walk through the countryside in places like Italy, Spain, or southern France. Look closely, you can still see it. A shepherd's hut using the arch of a Roman bridge as its roof. A medieval church built upon the foundations of a pagan temple, its walls embedded with old Roman bricks. The intricate mosaic floors of a wealthy senator's villa, now the simple, trodden earth of a farmer's barn. Each stone tells a story of transformation. This process wasn't instantaneous. It was a slow, organic shift over centuries. As the central authority of Rome dissolved, long-distance trade routes collapsed. The world shrank. A village that once received pottery from North Africa and wine from Gaul now had to rely on what it could make or grow locally. Life became more insular, more connected to the immediate land and its seasons. The grand Roman roads, marvels of engineering, fell into disrepair. Weeds grew through the cracks in the paving stones. Yet, people still used them, not for armies or imperial messengers, but for walking to the next village, for driving a cart to the local mill, or for pilgrimage to a new Christian shrine that had sprung up in an old Roman basilica. The infrastructure of empire became the local pathways of everyday folk. It's easy to romanticize this period, to see it as a simpler, more rustic time. But it was also a time of great uncertainty and hardship. Without the protection of the legions, communities were vulnerable. Disease, famine, and localized conflict were constant threats. Survival depended on cooperation, on community bonds, and on an intimate knowledge of the local environment. People learned to read the landscape in a new way. They knew which ancient cisterns still held water, which ruins offered the best shelter, and which crumbling walls could be fortified against raiders. The legacy of Rome wasn't just in its stones. It was in the very shape of the land they had altered. They had leveled hills, drained marshes, and planted olive groves and vineyards that would continue to feed people for 1,000 years. And what of their culture, their beliefs? The Latin language, once the universal tongue of the powerful, slowly fractured and evolved, giving birth to the Romance languages we know today: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. The stories and myths of Rome didn't just vanish. They blended with local traditions and the rising influence of Christianity, creating a rich and complex new cultural tapestry. Think of the saints who replaced the old gods, their shrines often built directly on top of ancient holy sites. This wasn't a hostile takeover, but a gradual absorption. The need for divine protection, for meaning, and for community rituals remained the same, even as the names and stories changed. The cycle of life, death, and rebirth played out not just in the fields, but in the souls of the people. This period, often dismissed as the Dark Ages, was actually a time of incredible creativity and adaptation. It was the crucible in which medieval Europe was forged. It was a time when the colossal, top-down structure of the Roman Empire gave way to a world built from the bottom up, by countless unnamed individuals making choices every day to survive and build a future for their children. So the next time you see a picture of a majestic Roman ruin, don't just see the ghost of a fallen empire. Look for the quieter story. See the niches where a shepherd might have sheltered from a storm. Imagine the smoke from a cooking fire rising from a makeshift home tucked into the side of a theater. Hear the distant echo of a church bell ringing from a tower built with Roman stone. The true legacy of Rome isn't just in the monuments it left behind, but in the enduring, unbroken thread of human life that wove itself through and around them. It's a powerful reminder that even when the greatest of empires fall, the rhythms of daily life, of planting and harvesting, of love and family, of community and faith continue. Life finds a way, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, persistent, and beautiful art of making do. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the quiet aftermath of a fallen world. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more explorations of history's forgotten chapters. We'll see you next time. Have you ever stood among ancient ruins as the sun sets and felt a whisper from the past? A sense that the stories etched into the stone are not entirely gone. It's a common belief that great empires fall, crumble to dust, and disappear. But what if they don't? What if they simply change form, their echoes lingering in the silent corridors of history, waiting to be heard? Take Rome, the Roman Empire. a civilization of unparalleled power and influence, didn't just vanish into thin air. Its pulse, though faint, can still be felt today. It's in the quiet rustle of pages in a library filled with old books and maps, in the flicker of a candle casting long shadows over tales of legionaries and emperors. The voice of Rome may have faded, but its spirit is woven into the very fabric of our modern world. It's a quiet legacy, a rhythmic presence that continues to shape our lives in ways we might not even realize. It's not a story of a fall, but of a transformation, an empire that became an idea, a foundation upon which our own world was built. Join us as we trace these echoes and discover how the ghost of Rome walks among us still. Let's begin with the very laws that govern our societies. Long before modern constitutions and legal codes, there was the law of Rome. Imagine standing in the Roman Forum, the heart of the empire, where orators debated justice and scribes meticulously recorded legal principles. This wasn't just a system for its time, it was a blueprint for the future. The Romans gave us concepts like innocent until proven guilty, the idea of a written legal code that applies to all citizens, and the importance of evidence in a trial. These weren't just abstract ideas, they were revolutionary principles that laid the groundwork for justice as we know it. Now, picture a modern courthouse, the grand columns, the solemn atmosphere, the lawyers arguing points of law. Much of this scene has its roots in ancient Rome. The legal texts we study in law schools today, the very structure of our arguments, owe a profound debt to Roman jurists like Ulpian and Papinian. Their meticulous work, preserved in texts like the Corpus Juris Civilis, became the cornerstone of legal systems across Europe and, by extension, the world. From the halls of power to the local courtroom, the Roman search for order and fairness continues to resonate, ensuring that justice, in its essence, is a legacy passed down through millennia. If law was the soul of Rome, then engineering was its mighty skeleton. The Romans were master builders, and nothing showcases their genius quite like their roads. They weren't just simple paths, they were feats of engineering, built to last for centuries. Picture a vast network, an intricate web of stone and gravel stretching from the misty hills of Britain to the sun-scorched sands of Mesopotamia. Over 50,000 miles of paved highway connecting disparate lands, cultures, and economies. These roads were the arteries of the empire, carrying legions, merchants, officials, and ideas to every corner of the known world. They were meticulously planned, straight as an arrow, wherever possible, with layers of foundation that ensured their durability. Look at a map of modern Europe today. You'll be amazed to see how many of our major highways and country lanes still follow the exact routes laid down by Roman surveyors 2,000 years ago. The Appian Way in Italy, the Fosse Way in England, these aren't just historical curiosities. They are living testaments to an engineering vision that was about more than just transport. It was about connection, about binding a vast and diverse empire into a single, cohesive entity. Every time we travel along these ancient corridors, we are participating in a legacy of movement and unity that began with the Romans. They didn't just build roads, they built the framework for a connected world. Now, let's listen closely. Can you hear it? The linguistic ghost of Rome is all around us. The language of the empire, Latin, may be considered dead, but its influence is immortal. Stroll through the ruins of Pompeii or stand before the Colosseum, and you'll see inscriptions carved into stone, formal, powerful language that declared the might of Rome to the world. But Latin was also the language of poets, philosophers, and everyday people. As the empire expanded, this language spread with it, mingling with local tongues and dialects across Europe. This fusion gave birth to the Romance languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. When you hear a conversation in a Parisian cafe or a song on a Lisbon street, you are hearing the direct descendants of the Latin spoken by Roman soldiers and settlers. But its reach extends even further. What about English? Though a Germanic language at its core, over half of its vocabulary comes directly or indirectly from Latin. Words like campus, agenda, video, animal, culture, science, memory, they are all Latin echoes in our daily speech. Every time we write a memo, discuss a legal matter, or study biology, we are borrowing from the linguistic treasure chest of the Romans. The language of legacy is not silent. It speaks through us every single day. So, we return to where we began, to the quiet, contemplative space where history breathes. We've walked the roads, heard the echoes in our laws, and spoken the words of an empire long past. Rome's legions have long since marched into memory. Its emperors are figures of legend, and its great monuments now stand as solemn reminders of a bygone era. The great, thunderous voice of the Roman Empire has indeed faded, replaced by the hum of the modern world. But its spirit was never truly extinguished. It simply transformed, becoming a silent, foundational force that underpins our civilization. It's in the logic of our legal systems, the roots of our journeys, the very words we use to express our thoughts. The Roman Empire proved that true power isn't just about conquest or territory. It's about ideas, innovation, and a legacy so profound that it becomes invisible, woven seamlessly into the fabric of the future. The voice of Rome is gone, but its soul whispers to us from every cornerstone of the world it helped to build. The candle may be out, but the light it cast continues to illuminate our path. Have you ever felt it? That strange, silent moment when the world seems to hold its breath. It's not a sound, not a sight, but a feeling deep within your bones. A sense that one age is drawing to a close, and another is waiting just beyond the veil to be born. It's the pause between the exhale and the inhale of history. The air grows still. The frantic energy of what was dissipates, leaving behind a profound, almost sacred quiet. In these moments, the grand narratives of empires and revolutions fade into the background. What remains is a sense of pure potential, a blank page upon which the future will be written. It's a time for introspection, for looking back at the fading light of a setting sun and wondering what the coming dawn will bring. The clamor of the old world, with its grand ambitions and monumental structures, becomes a distant echo. The streets, once teeming with the march of legions and the chatter of merchants from 100 different lands, fall quiet. The great libraries, repositories of an empire's knowledge, seem to sigh, their scrolls gathering a fine layer of dust, waiting for new eyes, new hands. This is not an ending of fire and fury, but a gentle, melancholic descent into twilight. A slow, graceful letting go. The world doesn't crash, it dissolves. It's like standing on a shoreline as the tide recedes, revealing the shells and stones that were hidden beneath the waves. The essential truths, the simple realities of life, are laid bare. We find ourselves in a liminal space, a doorway between what was and what will be. And in this stillness, there is a unique kind of clarity. The future is not yet a roaring torrent, but a gentle, babbling brook, its path still uncertain. We can almost hear the soft turning of the great cosmic wheel, feel the subtle shift in the currents of time. This is the quiet before the change, the deep, restorative sleep before a new dream begins. And then, slowly, imperceptibly at first, the new dream does begin. The world that awakens is not the one that fell asleep. The sharp, classical lines of marble and stone begin to blur, softened by moss and time. The relentless, driving rhythm of the old world gives way to a slower, more cyclical tempo. This is the dawn of the medieval age, not announced with trumpets, but whispered on the morning mist. Life pulls inward. The sprawling networks of roads and trade routes that once stitched the world together become less traveled. Communities turn to face themselves, their focus shifting from the vast horizon to the local field, the nearby forest, the church bell in the center of the village. The scale of existence becomes more human. The world is no longer a map to be conquered, but a landscape to be inhabited. The pace of life is now governed by the sun and the seasons, not by the edicts of a distant emperor. There's a rhythm to the days, the weeks, the years that is deeply connected to the earth. The frantic pursuit of more gives way to the patient cultivation of what is. The world becomes a place of softer sounds. The clash of steel and the roar of the Colosseum are replaced by the rhythmic thud of the blacksmith's hammer, the gentle lowing of cattle, the murmur of prayer in a stone chapel. The air is filled with the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and baking bread. It's a sensory world, one that you feel and touch and smell more than you simply observe. It's a life lived closer to the ground, its joys and sorrows more immediate, more tangible. The grandeur of the past is not forgotten, but it's repurposed. Ancient stones from a Roman villa might find a new home in the wall of a farmer's cottage. A fragment of a classical statue might be looked upon with a mixture of awe and superstition, a relic from a time of giants. History is not a book to be read, but a physical presence, a ruin on a hilltop, a story told by the fire. Imagine waking in this world. The first light is not cut off by towering tenements, but filters gently through the gaps in a wooden shutter. Outside, the world is wrapped in a thick, cool mist. It clings to the thatched roofs, beads on the spiderwebs, strung between fence posts, and muffles all sound. The world feels new, washed clean, every single morning. This is not the harsh, revealing light of the modern day, but a soft, mysterious glow that invites contemplation. As you step outside, the cool, damp air kisses your face. The silence is profound, broken only by the crow of a distant rooster or the drip of dew from a leaf. The mist obscures the horizon, making the world feel intimate and contained. Your immediate surroundings are all that exist, and they are rendered in soft, ethereal detail. The path ahead is a faint impression in the wet grass. The trees are gray phantoms, their branches reaching out like ghostly arms. There is a sense of peace in this. The anxieties of a large, complex world are held at bay by the fog. Your concerns are for the here and now, the warmth of the fire, the tasks of the day, the well-being of your family. There's a beauty in this simplicity, a deep sense of belonging to a place. The world is not something to be overcome or navigated. It is something to be a part of. The mist is a daily reminder of the mysteries that lie just beyond our sight, a symbol of the spiritual veil that was so present in the medieval mind. It encourages a kind of quiet reverence for the unseen, for the forces that shape our lives in ways we may not fully understand. As the sun climbs higher, the mist begins to burn away, but it doesn't vanish. It lifts, revealing the landscape piece by piece, like a curtain being slowly raised on a stage. The familiar fields, the winding stream, the dark line of the forest, they emerge from the haze, familiar and reassuring. The day has begun. This transition from the fading light of antiquity to the misty dawn of the Middle Ages fosters a deep sense of calm acceptance. It's not a resignation to a lesser fate, but a profound alignment with a new reality. The striving for worldly glory, for immortal fame etched in stone, is replaced by a different kind of purpose. It's a purpose rooted in faith, in community, and in the cycles of nature. There's an understanding that life is a pilgrimage, a journey with a spiritual destination. The hardships of this world, and there were many, are seen not as random misfortunes, but as tests of faith, as part of a larger, divine plan. This worldview provides a powerful anchor in a changing world. It offers a sense of order and meaning when the old political and social orders have crumbled. Instead of clinging to the wreckage of the past, people learn to build new lives with the materials at hand. They find strength not in individual ambition, but in collective belonging. The bonds of kinship, of village life, of the parish these become the bedrock of society. There is an acceptance of one's place in the great chain of being, a sense that everyone, from the king to the peasant, has a role to play in a divinely ordained system. This is not to say it was a world without struggle or aspiration, but the aspirations were different. They were for a good harvest, for healthy children, for salvation. The struggles were against the harshness of nature, against sickness, and against the temptations of the soul. It's a quiet, internal form of heroism, one that doesn't require monuments. This calm acceptance is a form of wisdom. It's the wisdom of knowing what you can and cannot control. It's the peace that comes from surrendering to a rhythm larger than oneself, whether it's the rhythm of the seasons or the perceived rhythm of God's will. It's a stillness, not of inaction, but of focused, meaningful action within a defined and understood world. It's the quiet heart of the medieval age, beating steadily beneath the surface of history. And so, the world settles. The dust of fallen empires becomes the soil for new growth. The quiet that once signified an ending now becomes the background music of daily life. It is in this quiet that new ideas take root, that new forms of art and music and thought can germinate, protected from the harsh winds of radical change. The medieval world was not a dark age, but a contemplative one. It was a time when humanity, perhaps for a moment, stopped shouting and began to listen to the whispers of the earth, the dictates of faith, and the quiet rhythm of its own heart. It was a world that understood the value of the pause, the power of the mist, and the peace that comes from accepting the dawn, whatever it may bring. The grand, sweeping gestures of history are fascinating, but perhaps there is just as much to learn from these periods of transition, these moments of quiet transformation. They teach us that endings are also beginnings, that loss can create space for new kinds of life, and that sometimes the most profound changes happen not with a bang, but with a slow, gentle exhale. They remind us that even after the most tumultuous storms, a calm will eventually settle upon the world, and in that calm, we can find our footing once more, and begin the slow, patient work of building anew. Perhaps in our own hectic, rapidly changing world, we can find a lesson in this. A lesson about the importance of slowing down, of listening to the softer sounds, of finding beauty in the mist, and of calmly accepting the tides of change, knowing that every receding wave reveals a new shore. Thanks for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this reflection, consider subscribing for more thoughts on the quiet corners of history. See you next time. Have you ever stood in a place so quiet you could almost hear the past? It's a profound silence, isn't it? Louder than any emperor's decree, more powerful than the tramp of 100,000 marching feet. For 2 minutes, just listen. Imagine the silence that fell over the Roman Forum when the last senators went home. The silence that crept through the Colosseum when the roar of the crowd faded for good. This wasn't the silence of peace, not at first. It was the silence of an ending. A silence that says, we were here, we built, we conquered, and now we are gone. The loudest sound in history isn't the clash of swords or the cry of victory. It's the quiet whisper of time, reclaiming everything. For centuries, Rome was more than a city. It was the world. Its legions carved an empire from the misty shores of Britannia to the sun-scorched sands of Mesopotamia. Its laws shaped societies. Its language became the foundation for many tongues we speak today. And its aqueducts, marvels of engineering, still stand as a testament to a civilization that believed it would last forever. They called it the Eternal City, and for 1,000 years it seemed they were right. But eternity, as it turns out, has a time limit. The story of Rome's fall isn't a single dramatic event. It wasn't one battle, one disastrous decision, or one incompetent emperor, though there were plenty of those. It was a slow, creeping decay, a death by 1,000 cuts, spread across generations. Imagine a grand, intricate tapestry. From a distance, it's a masterpiece. But up close, you start to see the threads fraying, one by one. It began on the frontiers. The borders, once relentlessly expanding, became porous. Barbarian tribes, people the Romans dismissed as uncivilized, began to press inward, not just for plunder, but for a piece of the Roman dream. The empire, stretched thin and overconfident, found its legendary legions struggling to hold the line. The military, once a source of strength and unity, became a source of instability. It was bloated, expensive, and increasingly filled with mercenaries whose loyalty was to coin, not to the eagle standard. Back in Rome, the political heart of the empire was failing. The transition of power became a deadly game. Emperors were made and unmade by their own guards. The Senate, once a body of great statesmen, was reduced to a rubber stamp for whichever general had the most swords. Political corruption was rampant. The gap between the fabulously wealthy elite and the impoverished masses grew into a chasm. While aristocrats feasted in their villas, much of the population relied on bread and circuses, free grain and spectacular violent games to distract them from their own misery. The social contract was broken. Then there was the economy. Constant wars drained the treasury. To pay for the army and the bureaucracy, emperors devalued the currency, minting coins with less and less precious metal. Inflation spiraled out of control. A coin that could buy a loaf of bread one year might barely buy a handful of grain the next. Trade routes that had been the arteries of the empire became clogged and dangerous. The intricate web of commerce that had made the Mediterranean a Roman lake began to unravel. People retreated from the cities, turning inward to self-sufficient farming estates, the precursors to medieval manners. And beneath it all, a crisis of faith. The old gods of the Roman pantheon, who had supposedly guided the city to glory, seemed to have abandoned it. New faiths, like Christianity, offered a different kind of hope, not in the power of the empire, but in the promise of an afterlife and a community of believers. This shift in belief, while offering solace to many, also challenged the very foundation of Roman identity, which was deeply intertwined with its traditional religion and the divine status of the emperor. The final collapse in the West wasn't a sudden implosion, but a gradual fragmentation. In 410, the Visigoths sacked Rome, an event that sent shockwaves across the known world. The Eternal City, which hadn't been breached by a foreign enemy in 800 years, had fallen. Though the empire would limp on for another few decades, the spell was broken. Provinces broke away. Warlords carved out their own kingdoms. In 476, the last Roman emperor in the West, a young boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus, was quietly deposed. There was no great battle, no final stand. The empire simply dissolved. So, why does this ancient story still grip us? Why do we return again and again to the ruins of Rome? Because we see ourselves in its reflection. We see the echoes of its triumphs in our own achievements, our global networks, our technological marvels, our sprawling cities, and we see the shadows of its failures in our own challenges. Think about it. The overextension of military power and the immense cost of maintaining a global presence. Sound familiar? The political polarization and paralysis, where leaders seem unable to solve fundamental problems. The growing economic inequality, where a few accumulate vast wealth while many struggle to get by. The degradation of our environment, a resource once thought to be infinite, and the crisis of meaning, the search for purpose and community in a rapidly changing, often confusing world. The story of Rome isn't a prophecy, but it is a powerful, cautionary tale. It teaches us that no system, no matter how powerful or seemingly permanent, is immune to decline. It reminds us that civilizations are not just built of stone and steel, but of trust, shared values, and a sense of common purpose. When those foundations erode, the grandest structures can crumble. But this is not where the story ends. And this is the most important lesson of all. The fall of Rome was not the end of the world. It was a transformation. The light of Roman civilization didn't just go out. It was scattered into 1,000 pieces, each carrying a spark of the old world into the new. Roman law became the bedrock of many modern legal systems. Latin, the dead language of a dead empire, evolved into the beautiful Romance languages: French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian. The Christian Church, which grew within the empire, became the central institution of the Middle Ages, preserving much of the classical knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. The roads, the aqueducts, the ideas they endured. And so we stand here now, at the dawn of a new day, looking out over the silent ruins. The sun rises, casting a warm, golden light on the broken columns and weathered stones. The air is still and peaceful. The silence we hear now is different. It's not the silence of an ending, but the silence of a long, deep breath. The world that came after Rome was different. Yes, it was messier, more fragmented, but it was also a world of new beginnings, new ideas, new peoples, and new possibilities. The end of one chapter was the beginning of countless others. Perhaps the ultimate lesson of Rome is one of humility and hope. Humility in the face of our own achievements, a recognition that we are temporary custodians of a world much older and more complex than we can imagine. And hope that even in times of decay and collapse, new life can emerge. Hope that the end of one thing is always the seed of another. Civilizations, like people, are mortal. They are born, they flourish, they decline, and they die. But the human spirit, the drive to build, to create, to connect, and to dream of a better future, that is the part of us that is truly eternal. The sun is climbing higher now. The shadows are retreating. A new day has begun. What we choose to build with the light we are given is up to us. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more journeys into the past and what it can teach us about our future.